here? Oh, how's it going? Just got me some stuff from gonna see the War of the Rohirrim and little hammer, because you need to be a little hammer handy, right? You know, nothing could possibly go wrong, right? Right.
Fuck you! I was right! Fuck you! I was right!
That's the sweet smell of vindication. What's up, my friends and enemies? Glad you are here. It's been a wild ride, and I have just watched The War of the Rohirrim, and the first first showing of it in theaters near where I am anyway. And there were 5 of us in the theater. Definitely a selling out person. And the 2 of them were me and my dad, and 3 random people I don't know. But it gets better. The movie was not good. I know. Complete shocker. I wouldn't like it because, I mean, I hate everything. I don't like anything in this world, right? Besides everything. And I don't know what you're talking about. I don't like things. I only hate them because I'm not disappointed. I'm not annoyed. I just hate things for no reason. I have 0 reasons. It's impossible to dislike something because you haven't got a good reason to like it. You only ever have bad reasons. You only have stupid, dumb, silly, whimsical reasons, and it usually means you're a racist, misogynist, homophobic. Pick something. And that's the only way you cannot like something. Because anything you ever actually argue in favor of is probably misogynistic, it's probably racist, it's probably sexist, yada, yada, yada. Because there is no such thing as source material. There is no true story to tell. It's all made up, and it doesn't matter because it's all fantasy, guys. It's like, it just doesn't matter. And why doesn't it matter? Well, because it's just fantasy. So who cares if they make characters race swapped? Who cares if they treat men like they're useless? I mean, it's not a big deal, right? Oh, you wanna make them not useless, and you want to make them not race swap. Well, I have a problem with that because it's fantasy, and I don't like that, or something like that, if I recall correctly. Yeah, that's the argument they made. It was like, it doesn't matter, so we can race swap them. But if it's like, oh, if it doesn't matter, then why are we race swapping them? Because you're a bigot, I guess. Yeah. So, I was disappointed. that's the easiest way to put it. So, in trying to, I'm trying to make this actually like fun, but I'm just so disappointed because when I first heard the announcement for the War of the Rohirrim, I was super stoked. I was like, oh man, we're gonna literally use the army of Rohan and trample Rings of Power underfoot, right? The fans are Minas Tirith. Rings of Power's the army of Sauron attacking it and sieging it. Rings of Power's using Grom and just battering down the gates. And then War of the Rohirrim is going to be the great Rohirrim army just showing up at the last minute and just death and just charge right in. It's going to be great. We're going to get all the stuff. Warner Bros. Is going to wipe the floor with Amazon about that. It didn't actually happen. If anything, I'm more offended about War of the Rohirrim than I am about Rings of Power. Now, this may come as a shock to you guys because I really dislike Rings of Power. Like, I really dislike it. But it's not just I dislike the War of the Rohirrim. I'm just blatantly, utterly disappointed because I wanted it to be so good. It's like if you just told the story along the lines that it was actually written, and you could treat the characters like they would be in Tolkien's world, because this did not happen in the world of the Rohirrim at all. Like nothing happened. Essentially nothing happened as it did in the appendices and such. But the point being is that in trying to get a show or a movie or whatever from the Middle Earth realm that could be worked, this was a great opportunity. I mean, animation and alleged anime style. It wasn't actually anime style. Sadly, it was more Western style than anime style because it was a Western studio that did it. It was not a Japanese studio which did it. There was a Japanese studio that did the animation, as in terms of like moving the images, but the actual images themselves were not drawn by a Japanese studio. And that's one of the big flaws right there. But this whole thing should have been done through a Japanese studio. The entire thing. Like, give them Tom Shippey with a translator and then just be like, make it great. And they would have probably done a really good job, because Japan doesn't screw around. They tend to make really good quality stuff when they're funded. And they have time. And they had all the time they needed to do this. A 2-hour and 10-minute movie. It's not exactly a full series. They could have. I don't think they could have made a series on the War of the Rohirrim. Maybe a mini series if you wanted to do like 22-minute episodes or something, which could have been cool in its own right. But a movie would have been fine, and it could have been even technically longer if more interesting things happened. They just left out a whole bunch of information. But if you guys recall, I made 2 videos about rumors that were in the War of the Rohirrim. And after covering Philippa Boyens' interviews and talking about them with, well, pretty much everybody I could think of and find to talk to, and being really disheartened by that, I kind of changed my tune from being super excited to super depressed about it, because it's like we had this awesome chance. It could have been the most glorious thing that we got out of Warner Bros. Since the original trilogy. Hobbit was a bit of a letdown, but it was miles better than both this and Rings of Power. But I was looking forward to, I mean, I like anime, but anime is a great medium for things that are difficult to do in real life because they either cost too much or whatever. But if you gave whatever the budget was, I honestly have no idea what the budget was because I didn't check. But if you gave that budget to an anime studio, they could probably make really high quality. Like, we're talking, I don't know if you guys know, but if you ever went to like a Demon Slayer movie or any of like the really top-notch high quality movies and stuff that they make, like Demon Slayer's got some serious fire animation. I don't necessarily care about the series myself because I've never watched it. I was never really interested in it, but it's got some nice animation. Now take that animation, or even go like the Vinland Saga aspect, because the Vinland Saga is closer to the War of the Rohirrim than obviously Demon Slayer is in style, because it's just Europeaners, fighting. It's like Britain and whatnot being attacked by Vikings. It's literally what kind of is. So you take that kind of a setup and everything, and the visuals of it, and then just turn it into a Middle Earth one, you'd be fine. You could make all the horses, all the horse riders. You could make all the enemies you ever wanted and never dreamed of, and you could do all height differences and everything. I mean, seeing Lord of the Rings in anime would be pretty stinking cool, especially if you gave it the proper treatment that of the books. That could be really, really fun, and super high quality. And then you could have people like Viggo Mortensen, who is in the possible runnings for being in the Hunt for Gollum as Aragorn, is taking his role again. But he's not sure if he's going to do it because he wants to make sure he can do it before he says yes. If he can't do it, he's not going to do it because he wants to be able to actually do it. But he's in his 60s or something like that now. I'm trying to remember. It might even be older than that. But it's just, he doesn't want to ruin it because he actually cares about the fans. He cares about the entirety of the project. Like, he cares about the source material. And that's some respect we don't get from a lot of actors. Ian McKellen also wants to reprise his role as Gandalf, which would be very fun because I think he does a great job. But when I did these rumors, I made 2 videos, part 1 and part 2, mostly because I got half of them first and then I got the other half second. And I decided to make 2 videos because it was like, this seems really important. And I specifically said some of the stuff could not be the case. Some of the stuff could be false. Some of the stuff could be this, some of be that, blah, 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 whatever the case might be. And I said, but even if one of them is true, that's enough to cause a lot of problems. And lo and behold, it wasn't just one that was true. It was all of them. Which I did say I was not surprised. I would not be surprised if it actually was true. So I figured we could do this, and I could kind of go over and over and over the entire movie as best as I can remember, because I'm partially blocking out. I'm actively fighting my brain in blocking it out versus not blocking it out so I can make this video, because I really want to forget it, but at the same time, it's a struggle. So, the movie, I guess this is spoilers for you guys, so movie's gonna be spoiled. Movie starts out with Hera, or however you want to say it. I'm just gonna say Hera because I don't want to accent it, because it doesn't make sense. Hera is the daughter of Helm Hammerhand and is a redhead. Because redheads are very, very common in Rohan, the land of blonde or brown hair. But yeah, totally normal when her 2 brothers are blonde and her dad's blonde. She somehow is magically redhead. I mean, if it was an anime, I'd make more sense, because the main characters always have the different hair color than everybody else. That's just how it is. But there's no reason to give her red hair. You might as well just give her blonde hair. Like, Eowyn had blonde hair. It wouldn't be any awkward. But anyway, we start out with like Miranda Otto reprising her voice of Eowyn as the narrator. And the voiceover at the beginning implies that this is the real story and that Tolkien essentially just lied or covered it up in his writings. Because like, you'll never see this story told in the lore, the histories. It's like, well, you won't hear it because it didn't happen. It's a pretty reasonable reason to not hear about it, because it didn't happen. Shocking, I know. Refer to the Philippa Boyens interview if you have any questions on that. Basically, they just said we felt close to this unnamed character that has like a sentence in the entirety of the appendices, and well, all of Tolkien's works at all. But we really felt a connection with this unnamed character, and we wanted to make everything about her, which is ironic. But then her name, Hera, is a Greek name instead of Rohirrim. Now, there is some potential for it to be in a Old English, Anglo-Saxon kind of thing, but it would have probably not been before the Greeks, so I would say it's a Greek origin name that they maybe took some bits to it, or there's a slight difference to it. But she's the main character and the only one that really matters. Case in point, the whole story's about her. So we start out with her on our horse, and she's riding and trying to get someplace, and she sees these 2 eagles that should never be there, because the eagles stay in the mountains of mist, if I recall correctly, and they don't really pitter-patter around Middle-earth randomly, but allegedly one of these eagles is a fledgling. So the fledgling comes out and is like, hey, I'm just gonna fly around with my parent or whatever. And she gets off of her horse, pulls out this giant meat stick of like some animal. I don't know what it would be, maybe like a bull, and just took off this huge haunch. This looks like a what is it called? the Flintstones kind of giant meat chunks or something. You see them like rip it off the bone or something. Takes it and like spins, and flings it in the air, and then it gets snatched out of the air by the fledgling and all that jazz. And you're like, wait a minute. They shouldn't be there. And if they were there, or if they were wild, which they're not because they're great eagles, they're giant eagles, not regular eagles. But if they were wild and they were hostile, they would have just and taken her out, and that'd have been the end of the story, and we can wrap this puppers up. But so she does that, and then she rides back to Edoras and whatnot, and we get the Fellowship theme being changed and slightly repurposed into Hera's theme. And then she gets all dressed up, and she meets her brother and whatnot, and he's very feminine, where he sings really high pitched, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but he's more of a bard, even though he's a good archer. He's more, I want to say, not necessarily flamboyant, but he appears more effeminate than you'd expect from a man of Rohan. Maybe there's nothing behind that. I don't know. It seemed a little. It seemed like a girl was singing, and then they switched over to the boy or male voice actor. And it was a little odd. So they're like, we're having party, company's coming over and everything. They summoned the lords of the Rohirrim to the hall. Blah 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 blah. And then there's like this list, and the Samwise character, which it's literally just repurposed Sam. He's like trying to read to the list, but the bottom one is just a sigil because the bottom of the page is ripped off. And they're like, oh, I don't recognize this sigil. It's like, oh, that's the sigil of the Shield Maidens because they're totally a house or something. Except they're not. They've never been a house. A Shield Maiden is a person who defends after all is lost. That's what a Shield Maiden is. And I said person, specifically a female that defends the house, similar to like an onibushi or something in Japanese culture. But they're giving them like a specific house. Like there's this whole horde of them somewhere or something. And it's like, but they're not. They're really, they don't really show up, which I was surprised because I heard a different rumor, different from these particular rumors, that they find like an Amazonian tribe of female warriors, and we assumed that would be the Shield Maidens. But thankfully, they didn't make it in the movie, so there's a win. But yeah, Shield Maidens is their own house, and they have their own banner, and it's hung behind the throne. Like it's super popular or powerful or something. We find out that Wolf, the main protagonist or antagonist, sorry, not protagonist, is a childhood friend of Hera, which makes absolutely no sense since Helm and Freka don't get along. But when they do the scene of them like being children, they're using literal steel weapons. Steel weapons. It's like 12-year-olds. And you got Hera with her little buckler and her little sword, and then Wolf with his sword, and then she gives him like his cut across his eye, and he tells her to leave so his dad doesn't find out or whatever. And it's just like, why? But then we find out Wolf is in love with her because Freka shows up with his commander general and his son, which Wolf was never there. But Wolf proposes to Hera because Freka had heard a rumor that basically Helm had gotten a wedding proposal from the Gondorians, from Gondor, for Hera's hand. But Hera's just like, I'm not going to get married to any man. I don't want to get married to nobody. I'm going to meet my own woman. Yes, it sounded as stupid as that. But then, tensions rise. But Freyolaf, who is cousin to Hera and her brothers, is race swapped. She's got super dark skin for some random reason. Not sure why. He tries to stop the fight and everything, but he's not portrayed as evil, stupid, or weak. He is moderately competent, but he's not Like, he's just not as good as Hera, let's put it that way. Now, historically, Freyalof becomes the king of Rohan, and Theoden is descendant from his line. So that's nice that he's actually in it, and it does end that way, but not the way we wish it would. And Hera is portrayed as the voice of reason, and the only voice of reason, like anything. Although Freyalof actually does have a couple lines where he's like, "This is not wise." And also the commander for Freka and Wolf, he's very wise. Like, he's making good calls, but he's just getting ignored left and right. Freka insults Helm, and Helm insults Freka, and they're like, "Well, let's take this outside." And Freka punch, punch, punch. And Helm's like, "My turn, one punch," and Freka's dead. Which is lore accurate. The part that's not lore accurate is Wolf was not there. So now Wolf sits there and says, "I'll make you pay for that." And instead of killing him and just ending everything right then and there, because, again, that would make sense in the movie, but we wouldn't have a movie if that was the case, but it would have not been possible because he wasn't there in the books either. He's just like, "You're banished, you're exiled, blah, 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 blah." So then him and his ilk go away, and they're like the West Marches of Rohan, and they have like partial Dunlending blood and everything. But they're not Dunlendings, but they technically are in the books. And they're just Rohirrim, which doesn't make much sense. But they get mixed with like hired thugs later on, who are Dunlendings, ironically. And Freka, before all of this, was trying to sell the marriage proposal like a way to strengthen the bonds of Rohan against Gondor, and rather than uniting the Freka's Dunlandish blood with the Rohirrim royalty, because he wanted to gain more power, and by doing so through blood mixturing into the Rohirrim royalty, which is a move that a smart politician or noble would probably take. And then after Wolf is banished and everything, we cut to Hera no longer being able to be out by herself. So she's out riding with, was it Freyalof, her nanny, shield maiden lady, and Sam, the Rohirrim Sam. And then there's been like this disease thing going around, which makes no sense, and it just pops up for like a very brief second, and then it just never comes back into the story again. And they find this body of like a Southron, and it's a mercenary apparently. Freyalof recognizes as a mercenary, but are like, "Why would a Southron be here? We're nowhere near them. They'd have to go through Gondor to get here." And then they see this diseased, gone insane Oliphant, aka Mimikil. And basically it goes attack on them, and they're like, "Run!" They're on horses, but the horses are freaking out. So Freyalof tries to attack it, and technically survives the attack, and he like tries to cut it from the underbelly, but doesn't do anything, right? Like, doesn't do anything. And then instead, like, he gets knocked down, but then Hera, the competent one, picks up this horn by the dead corpse of the Southron, blows it, which gets the Mimikil's attention, and it chases after her, and she goes into this forest, the forest that's dangerous, and you don't go in there because something lives in there. So she's like leading it in there by herself. Everybody else is way behind, not reacting, not doing anything. They're just sitting around doing nothing for no reason. She charges into the forest, and guess what? She sees the water, and she hears this old, or she remembers this old little tale about some dark waters have some creatures in it or something. So she takes this little spear thing and chucks it in the water, and it thuds into the shadows. And then you see it stir, and it gets sucked underneath. And that's at the same time the Mimikil comes bursting out of the trees and goes for it. This watcher in the water, for some reason, is somewhere in Rohan, which it shouldn't be there. And it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's not even Fanghorn. It's just a forest randomly. And just watching the water basically comes out, grabs the Oliphant, rinks it in, and just eats it whole. Now, keep in mind, Olifants and Mimikil, very large creatures, but they didn't get the size. Like the model of the Olifants kept changing, so I wasn't sure. Like, are they super big or are they super small? Like, what are they? They kept changing. But this Watcher in the water has this tree randomly growing out of its head, and it has the mouth big enough to swallow an Olifant. Now, if you remember from Fellowship of the Ring, Frodo gets grabbed by one at the Mines of Moria entrance. Well, its mouth wasn't that big. Like, it had a big mouth, not big enough for an Olifant. So this thing just randomly just eats it, pulls it underwater, and just settles down as a tree, standing up in the middle of this lake for no reason. So it's just, okay, Hera manages to kill this Mimikil by luring it in, pissing off one monster to kill the other monster, and then, woohoo, all that's good. But then she gets kidnapped by wolf's men, and they literally just throw a bag over her head, pick her up, and throw her over the shoulder. And she's just like, let me down, let me. She didn't just take the bag off. She just, let me down, let me down. No idea why. Just. Now, the funny thing, they bring her back to their little base, and they throw her on the floor. She sits up. What's the first thing she does? She pulls the bag off of her head. It's just like, so painful. But yes, in this particular instance, they're getting saved by Freyalof, Sam, and the nanny. And the nanny, who's a shield main's like, I've got an idea. So that she comes bursting in after Wolf and Hera have an altercation. And the nanny bursts, like kicks the door in with the guy going flying backwards into it. And then gets into combat with Wolf. And the nanny tells Hera to get out and escape. She jumps down onto this little canvas, rolls off the ground, gets her horse, and gets ready to take off. And the shield maiden comes out and they jumps on the back of it, and they're like, they go. And then Freyalof has this really cool scene where he just like shoots these arrows through these guys' heads and cuts off some hands. And it's like, Freyalof's looking pretty boss. Don't think it happened that way. It did look good though. Like, it was entertaining for that scene, and it was the violence, chopping off limbs, arrows through heads. Pretty cool. And that was like the only time I really got like excited the entire thing. But then they all like get away. Even though this entire camp of Dunlendings, they just get away. No particular reason. And Wolf just basically got his butt kicked by the shield maiden. That was about it. The old shield maiden, former shield man, I should say. So Helm gets really pissed off at Freyalof for allowing his daughter to be in danger. And it's like, he has no control over an Olifant going psycho. He has no control over Hera disappearing because she's the fastest rider he has, as she tells Helm, and was way ahead of them. And somehow Wolf's men just happen to be in the area right next to the Watcher of the Water where the Mimikil gets eaten. And they just happen to get, like, there's a lot of plot contrivances in this, like a lot of plot contrivances. And then Helm basically just antagonizes everything and everyone in sight and is sort of just yelling like an insane guy, and basically banishes Freyalof because he's like, you're not loyal. And Freyalof's like, you'll always have my sword whether you want it or not. And then he basically doesn't exist until the very end. I mean, there's like a scene for like a couple seconds here or there, but you don't really see him. He stays at the Dunharrow basically the rest of the movie until the very end. Helm doesn't go to the Hornburg when he's told, like, we need to go to Helm's Deep. That's the place where we could, go. And he wants to fight at Edoras. And Hera disobeys him during the fight and secretly moves everybody out, sending them towards Helm's Deep. It's not called Helm's Deep. It's the Hornburg at the time. And during this fight, they're betrayed by a noble. Now, keep in mind, when she was captured, she saw the signet, but she didn't know what the signet was. But then later on, she finds out it's one of the Rohirrim nobles that promised to cover a flank for Helm's army when they were attacking the Dunlendings. But he betrays them. But she's a princess of Rohan and doesn't know every sigil to every house? That's like standard education. You have to know who the nobles are because when you have to interact with them, you have to know what their sigils, which house they're from, or whatever. But she saw this little note thing on Wolf's table with this sigil on it, and it's the sigil of the guy that ends up betraying them. And she learns this after her father goes out. Plot contrivance again. The noble tries to kill her. She's getting her butt handed. So I'll give him that. She's not like overpowered in every instance, but she is overly smart. But she basically, her horse kicks him away from her. She grabs a pitchfork, stabs him, and basically, she holds it up, and the horse kicks him into the pitchfork, and he dies. And that's that little arc, I guess. And then basically, Helm and his sons are out there with the military and everything, and they're charging the Dunlendings, and they're taking some pretty decent losses. But Haleth and Hama, the sons, are killed in the first battle before they ever plan on even going to the Hornburg. Now, in the book, Hama dies during sorties from the Hornburg a year later. Like, it's not a short siege. They make it seem very, very short. It's basically like right before winter, and then outside of winter, and it's still partially somewhat winter. It's like the early points of spring. And the first son, the oldest son, before we get to that, Hera kills another Mumakil, like deliberately kills it herself by basically plotting. So she has some of the Rohirrim guards that were left at Edoras, as the rest went out to fight, and has them set on the gate on fire. And then they send a Mumakil, Wolf sent a Mumakil to take down the gate, but it won't go in because of the fire. And while it's going, she shoots like a mini ballista thingy, like it's not like about this big, and just shoots it into its mouth, kills it. So she's killed 2 Mumakil. She's the cause of 2 Mumakil dying. And then the other one breaks into the wall, but then her brother comes in and climbs on top of it. It's just chop suing and it's looking pretty cool. And he goes over and starts chopping into its head and eventually does kill it. He's like, yeah. The wolf just goes over and goes, shoots an arrow, hits him through the neck. He dies. It's not technically how he should have died, but whatever. I mean, at least he died. But it was a very silly thing to do. One, he's not wearing a helmet. 2, he just stood there in the middle of a battle going, yeah, for some reason. And then it gets worse. So her other brother gets the middle, her both older than him, but the middle son gets captured and taken to Helm's Deep. Okay, again, it's the Hornburg at the time. And Wolf basically kills him. Even though Helm's like, I'll swap with you. Like, give me my son and you can take me instead. But he just kills him because Wolf's only determined to wipe out the entire line of Helm Hammerhand. Just because, like, he could have taken out Helm, which would have severely weakened the morale of everybody else if he had killed him. And it was really dumb. And his commander's sitting there, Wolf's commander's sitting there going, like, take the deal. Like, let's do this. Like, let's get on this. We can go home. Everything will be great. We already control everything. They're all locked here. They can't go anywhere. They're weak. We're great. We're doing awesome. And he's like, no, he basically wants to burn the world to the ground at this point for no reason. Helm was wounded in that battle. He was shot with a bunch of arrows and spends the rest of the film basically sick until in Helm's Deep, he goes into his wraith-like sorties into basically the Dunlending territories that were outside of Helm's Deep walls and just starts killing people. And they're like, oh, the wraith is here, it's killing everybody. Like, the Dunlendings are terrified, which they should be. And basically there's like these hidden passages in Helm's Deep that lead to these little outcroppings you can get out and whatnot. And Hera tries to find her father through this, and she sees like a ghost phantom version of her father and follows him down this little pathway that she accidentally gets through that she can't get back through because the mechanism only works one way for some reason. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. And then she goes outside, and right outside the hole is 2 orcs. For some reason. No reasons why. They're not allied with the Dunlendings. They're just in the mountains, scavenging. and they're gathering rings for Mordor, which this should not be happening yet, as far as I recall, because this is a while before even Bilbo gets the One Ring, so this shouldn't be happening. But basically, one of them's like, "I smell fresh meat," and it's like, it's blizzarding. It's cold, and I don't know if you know this, but when it's cold, it's really difficult to smell stuff, like really difficult. And the wind's blowing, so unless the wind is blowing towards you, you wouldn't smell it probably at all. And even then, it would be very, very difficult because it's cold. It's not just like a warm summer breeze that's like, I smell Frank. Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys. Like, we don't get that. So it gets a little weirder because Hera decides to crawl out without her cloak and is just there hiding, gets found because she runs into a troll that's with the orcs. Again, for no reason. They're not with the Dunlendings, they're not with Wolf, they're just there. No idea why. Just there to basically drop the member berries of remember the rings. We're looking for those rings. So they get through. Trolls like, well, let's feed him to the beast, and then Helm comes flying down and just breaks off a horn of the troll, and then proceeds to kill the two orcs with his bare fists, and then starts just bludgeoning back and forth with the troll. Now, the troll gets killed by Hera, who throws a javelin, one of the orcs' weapons, into the head. Now, keep in mind, it wasn't under 10 seconds and it wasn't a nice troll, so Galadriel still got her beat. But yeah, Hera ends up killing it, not Helm. And that was just like, okay, so Helm's not getting anything really going for him. Oh, also, in the Hornburg, Hera basically steals Aragorn's entry into Helm's Deep, or like kind of a thing. Because they took several lines straight from the movies and used them in this, which really irritates me. Especially like when they ride from Edoras into the Dunlendings. He basically used the death thing, which basically completely ruins Theoden's whole speech and his whole charge for death and everything like that. Like, they just repurposed it, but used it back in the prior time. So basically, all Theoden is a copycat of his ancestors, which makes it look less worthy for Theoden. So it's a diss. During the siege, because we'll get back to Helm and Hera, but during the siege, the Rohirrim don't make any sorties. They don't try to take on the Dunlendings and possibly break out. They don't do nothing. They just sit there like bumps on a log the entire time. Even though the sorties are what gets Helm's kids killed, or at least one of the kids killed. And every single male character at some point in the show or in the movie gets saved by Hera. The main ones. So brothers, dad, Sam, cousin. Like, she saves all of them. So basically, her and Helm are running from Wolf, who came up to discover the troll, because they hear the troll, so they're coming up to discover the troll. Now, I did see Shad's video on his rendition, and he had mentioned the cave that they had crawled out of. He's like, well, they couldn't just go back into it. It's like, actually, they couldn't go back into it. I'll give the movie that, is that when the troll and Helm were fighting, the troll threw a rock, which Helm dodged, and that rock hit where that entrance was and caused a landslide, basically. So you'd have to move all these rocks to get back in, and you would have made a mess that the snow would not have covered in time for Wolf to get there, and he would have found basically a back way into Helm's Deep. So either way, it was a crapshoot. So I'll grant them that it made sense. It took a second for me to register it, but it did make sense. So they flee, going down into the camp of the Dunlendings, who are completely caught off guard because they weren't expecting anybody to be behind them, let alone the person that they're terrified of. And Wolf's going, stop them! And they just kind of run through without much issue. They get to the top, and the gates, which open like this, Not this. This. They're frozen shut. And I'm like, that's a good defense tactic, I suppose. But in the inside, there's no bar like sliding it in, which wouldn't make sense anyways because it slides like this. So why do they have the little bars that you're supposed to slide your wooden boards between to prevent them from breaching it, because they're supposed to open this way normally. That's how gates are. They go like this. But if you can't get that, what do? Well, you're going this way. Well, if the board goes this way, it'll just slide off the doors when you open them. There's no point to them. So it just doesn't make sense. And I just gotta keep it together, right?
Down! Get a hold of yourself!
Okay. I've got it together. But seriously, the doors sliding this way, I just don't get it. Why anybody think that would make sense intellectually speaking, or, well, any reason whatsoever, for that matter. Point being, they can't get the gates open with a whole bunch of guys doing the little twirly whirly, which it's not even that type of gate, because the twirly whirly would go up and down. It wouldn't go side or forward or back. They didn't think about anything, apparently, in this film. And four guys get flung backwards, and then they can't get it open. And so the nanny shield maiden runs over, like, I can't get it open. And then on the other side, you've got Helm running up there with Hera, and they're both, or Helm's like, and he can't get it. And then Helm and Hera go, they manage to pull it apart a little bit, and then Helm like just grabs Hera, shoves her in to this little crack, which means she's really, really small. And it's not, they can't get it any further. And I'm sitting here like, all those guys that are just standing around the other side of the gate could just come over and help open it, because they could defend that little crack until they close it again. But again, the mechanism doesn't make sense. So what are you expecting them to do? Because you should be able to open and close that easily, even in the cold. Because what if happens if you're trying to get out and you can't get out because it's frozen shut? You're all toast. Possibly literally, depending on if it's on fire. But because of that, Helm's outside. But, okay. The amount of validation is ridiculous. Everyone has nothing but nice things to say about Hera. And to be fair, she's nice enough as it is. But she's all, oh, you're the best. You should be you should be the actual ruler of Rohan. Oh, you're so brave. You're so stunning. You're so amazing. You're my pride and joy. You're all these things throughout the entire film. It happens all the time. It's ridiculous. Helm and Freyaluf both tell her she deserves to be king or queen or the ruler or whatever. And there's no reason to make her that, because she just shows nothing really leadership quality wise other than just being smarter than everybody else. And that would imply that everybody else is really stupid and doesn't know how to do things, even though Freyaluf has a good head on his shoulders. But in the moment where he pushes Hera through this crack in the gate, he just starts waxing eloquently about how she could rule the world and all that stuff, which you might have seen in the clip. And that Rohan needs her, not him. So then he closes it behind. I'm like, well, if you could have closed it, you could have opened it further and gotten in and then closed it and whatever. And I did initially have thoughts about why didn't the guards on top shoot at the Dunlendings that are coming up the causeway. And then it hit me that there's a blizzard going on. So even if you did have a bow and arrow, your aim's probably going to suck, because the wind's blowing really, really harshly. But then again, maybe the mountains blocking most of the wind. But from the visuals we saw, it was just swinging back and forth. And it didn't seem like there's any chance of an arrow hitting what its intended target was. But you could have just pelted a whole bunch of arrows, because the Dunlendings are climbing up the causeway going like this, and they can't see what they're doing. They're fighting against the wind. All you gotta do is literally shoot a bunch of arrows, and you could hit like a whole wall of arrows to kill a whole bunch of Dunlendings. But instead, Helm Hammerhand's outside, and he just starts going, just beating everybody to death. It's kind of cool, but we don't really get to see much. And then it says the next morning, he's sitting there going like, ah, like in mid roar of defiance, frozen solid, and he's dead. Now, in the books, from the lore perspective, he does freeze to death, but he doesn't do it that way when he dies. He's out in the field, like surrounded by corpses, and basically single-handedly just demolishes a huge chunk of this army. And it's just like, that's pretty cool, but we don't get to see it. And for whatever reason, they seem to want to really lean heavily into this wraith-like thing, kind of like how Shadows of War and Shadows of War. Shadows of War had this thing where like Helm Hammerhand was a wraith. Like a Nazgul wraith. When they were around before he was even existent. Like, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But that's what they went with, and I did not like that about that game whatsoever. But it's a fully fanfic game, and everybody knows that nobody's even trying to pass it off as like true Tolkienism, because that's not how it worked. But that happens, and then basically Hera decides she's going to get her father's armor together. And it's in this big box backpack thing that little Rohan Sam twaddles up 200 and 300, 600 stairs, whatever the number was, and gets them to her, and she climbs up this mountain that they're at. Now keep in mind, they couldn't send for help because all their messenger birds were being shot down. Except that in order for the Dunlendings to shoot them down, they'd have to be within range of the Hornburg defensive archery to basically shoot those birds. And you also have a massive distance that they would have to shoot at accuracy for every single messenger bird. Not to mention they have the beacons. And they don't light them because Helm was like, oh, I don't need no help from Gondor, blah, blah, blah. Gondor literally is the ones who show up in the story. So, yes, you do. But she climbs up, and you're thinking, oh, maybe she's going to go light the beacons. No, she goes to the giant eagle Eyrie and tries to talk to the fledgling, the white gray eagle that she had fed at the very beginning of the film. And it's a very confusing scene, because she's like, I've read that you can speak the common tongue. And the bird never speaks the common tongue at all. Just, bird noises. And you're thinking, what are you doing? So she climbs up this with little feet hook things and 2 ice picks and climbs up like Galadriel, right? And you're thinking maybe they took this from Rings of Power. I don't know. But she gets up top and she's like, I need you to send a message to Freyalaf, Dunharrow. Will you please do this for me? And the eagle agrees because it understands and agrees, even though it's not what it does. They obey Manwë. They don't just any schmuck that shows up at their Eyrie. They just like, hey, by the way, I need you to do something. Sure thing, buddy. So the eagle decides to swoop down, and Rohan Sam, is in this tower with the armor box backpack thing. And it swoops down, grabs it, and flies away, destroying part of the tower at the time. But I mean, that's probably the least of the worries, because you can always repair that. So swoops down, grabs that, and it's gone. And it's coming to Freyalaf. Freyalaf's at Dunharrow, and he's like, all right, we're going to pack it up, we're going to leave. And it seems like they're going to head for like Gondor or something. Or like we're not really sure what they're doing, because it doesn't really give you a lot of information. As they're turning away, you hear that like the eagle thing, and it's this big thing dropping by, and it just drops this thing in front of him, and he's like, whoa. And it's Helm's helmet and his armor and all that kind of stuff. And Freyolf, does his thing. And then the eagle just buggers off to do whatever it feels like doing. And there's a presumed thought, which we'll get to later on. It's like the last piece of the whole thing. But essentially, she uses the eagles as a carry picture, kind of like when Gua here brought me the hammer and the mug. It was really cool. I didn't realize that we had such services available to us, and I've been doing this wrong the entire time. Like, who needs carrier drones when I can have giant eagles do it for me? I've been doing this wrong my entire life. What's going on? So, yeah. If I had known anybody could just go up to a giant eagle and, make them do what I want them to do, I have free flights for the rest of my life. It'd be great. But during the siege, Wolf and his men have been building this giant tower, but he's running out of gold, so they need to like rush it fast. So they're building this tower, and the tower goes up, and it goes up even higher, and it goes up even higher. And at the top of this thing, there's a guy sitting there, boom, 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 and he's just playing this drums as it's rising up, and he's at the very top of it. And it turns out the siege tower is actually a giant bridge. So construction-wise, or like structurally sound-wise, this thing falls down, and it should snap immediately. But it doesn't. Funny part is the drummer's still on the top, and as it falls, he goes, ah! And he's dead. There's no freaking way he survived that. No bloody way he survived that. So, he literally commits suicide to play drums. Blows my mind. I don't get it. He could have literally been anywhere else and played the drums. He didn't have to be up there. But now, they're like, let's charge across. Now, Hera decides to go down into the storage area where the creepy old helm storage room lady is, and just she has this little chest that was apparently for a bride, and it has this like wedding dress with holes in and stuff in it. So she decides she's going to distract Wolf by putting on this bride dress and take his attention as Rohan Sam and all the other guards lead the people to safety. In other words, let the men go run away, I'm going to stay and fight. And that's probably not what their original intention was, but that's actually how it ends up really being. So then she goes out on her horse, she challenges Wolf and everything, and the general's like, don't take the bait. And he takes the bait, because why wouldn't he? Instead of just saying, charge, and winning, he's like, I'll do it. And then they do this little duel thingy, and it gets off the bridge eventually, back towards Wolf's side. And there's a bout, and she beats him. And it's just like, what else is new? Well, he tells his men to kill her, and the general's like, no, you're a coward and you have no honor. So then Wolf just stabs the general, who presumably dies right there, and then tells all the men, the Dunlendings, to charge, and they charge, right past everybody, and just runs up the big causeway, and the shield maiden nurse nanny lady is coming down the other side, and she's like blocking, stabbing, but like she's not actually stopping the flow. They're just going around her, right? Like she's not hurting anybody. She's just kind of like parrying, and then they don't really care because they want to get inside. And there's a couple of guards that are kind of like into the doorway. Like if you have the long wall, there's like a little doorway up some stairs. If you've watched Two Towers, you know what it is from the Helm's Deep scene. And they're shooting arrows and, picking off a couple guys here or there. But it's about to be a flood. So the nanny just survives because they don't even bother with her. And now you got Hera and Wolf in another duel. But Hera doesn't have a sword or anything, even though she had used her shield originally, because it is actually a cool technique, and I have to agree with Shad, that when Wolf's sword came down onto her shield, she took it and twisted it out of his hands and flung it away. So he didn't have a sword or her shield. And the shield maiden decides to frisbee her buckler to Hera, and she uses that, and they're fighting in a little bit more. And at the same time, the bridge gets caught on fire because of some fire arrows that the Rohirrim are shooting at it. And at the same time, Freyalof shows up with this armor attached to him, like Helm's armor. And all they see is the silhouette of the armor, and all the Dunlendings are like, "It's the Wraith! He's back to get us all!" They all freak out and just start running towards Freyalof, ironically, and his men. And they're at the top, and they're pulling the whole Two Towers Gandalf, Aomir, down the side, just plow into the Dunlendings. And it's just like, they're just stealing everything from the movies. They're not even giving us an original thought. They're not giving us a new rendition of it. They're not telling us the story as it was, which would have been cool, but they didn't do that. And while he's up at the top and they're all freaking out, Wolf's refusing to give in, but then he's like, kind of like he's gonna, but then he whips out a dagger and tries to like fight her. So she takes the buckler and just starts, like, she throws him to the ground, and she's like uses it to basically suffocate him, like cutting off of his esophagus, and for all we know, he's dead. And yet, lo and behold, he dies from that. And I'm just like, you didn't even like crush his throat. You just held it until he ran out of oxygen. That was it. But her tiny, tiny little frame held him down. I'm like, he may be a coward, but he shouldn't be weak, like physically weak. But apparently he was. And he's, he just had it in for the whole family, and it ended up being his own downfall, etc. And then they rout the armies, and they win the day, kind of a thing. And Freyalof becomes king, and he comes over to her and is like, "By the way," but it's this, like, Hera's whole plan was literally a mirror image of Éowyn and Theoden. So, in the Two Towers, Theoden tells Éowyn to escort the women and children away from the wargs in the Two Towers, and that's basically what Hera told Sam, the Rohirrim Sam, and he gets all the soldiers, and they're trying to like sneak everybody out the back way through the collapsed area that they brushed away enough to get out of it, while the army's attention was drawn to them, which isn't a bad tactic per se. It just doesn't seem like it's going to be a thing that's easily done. But Freyalof's army showing up basically cements the fact that they're fine. And it's a strange thing. But Freyalof doesn't beat Wolf. Not Edoras, which I believe is the source material. But Freyalof goes to the Hornburg, and Wolf's men who haven't been defeated by Hera, and the Shield Maiden think that he's the ghost and runs away. Like, it's just, it's all these things. All of these things. Just, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't follow any lore. But Hera defeats Wolf in hand-to-hand combat, and that's how he dies, through the suffocation. But throughout the entire movie, Hera's always going off like, "I will marry no man." She's either lesbian or celibate. Neither of which are going to benefit Rohan, and it doesn't hold to the love message that Tolkien typically holds to. Now, there are political marriages that could be loveless, etc., but typically when Tolkien interacts with it, they're well-known love stories like Aragorn and Arwen, or Beren and Luthien, or, any of the number of romantic entanglements that he does. They're very wholesome. But she's always going off about how she's not going to be with any man or whatever. And it's just like, that's unnecessary, and not the way Shield Maidens would be, because the Shield Maidens, again, are not like their own clan or tribe or anything. It's literally, you are a Shield Maiden of Rohan when you are the last line of defense against an invader, and you take up a sword or a weapon to repel attackers from your hold. That's all it is. And there may or may not be, a couple sprinkled through several thousand soldiers if necessary, like if manpower was in dire need, but it's not the normal thing for him. So, but Helm and Fryloff both do insist that Hera should be the next ruler, but she doesn't want to be because she wants to be free and whatever. So then at the end, after Fryloff is basically, well, not basically, is crowned king of Rohan, and he's Theoden's ancestor. And Fryloff approaches her like, "What you gonna do?" And he's just like, "Oh, my sword will always be there for you." And she's like, I'm gonna go and be free and on adventures." And he's like, "Haha," and he leaves. And then the Shield Maiden shows up, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm coming with you." And it's stealing lines again. And then basically, she's like, "I'm gonna go with you." And where are we going? He's like, "Well, I've been told, or I've been sent a message to go to the north and join up with someone who has some questions, you know." And it turns out Hera and her Shield Maiden friend leave Rohan to go work for Gandalf because he has question about the rings that the orcs were gathering, but at this time that wouldn't be a thing because they weren't gathering rings, and it's just, it doesn't make sense. Like it's just convoluted and nonsense. But it is what it is, I suppose. But it's, and that's how it ends. So, out of all the things I did mention in those rumors, like the list I went through for part 1 and part 2, every single one of them was in it. So vindication. I have been vindicated by the film itself. And to everybody who left comments saying, "Well, you should watch it first," I'm like, I would have a lot more faith if they didn't come out in interviews and say what they said, like Philippa Boyens did, and they didn't have any agendas, or if they actually were interested in making a legitimate film. They weren't. But I would say it's worse than Rings of Power just due to the fact that I'm more disappointed because I was expecting so much more from it, being an anime, for it being, well, the Rohirrim. The Rohirrim are one of my favorites in all of the Tolkien Legendarium because they're horse lords. They're practically, Norsemen on horses, and I mean, they're cool. They have a freaking fire soundtrack too, and everything. Like, there's so much that could have been done with it. And we could have had a good movie, and maybe it would even be 3-4 hours long, animated. But it would have been, if you had given it to a Japanese studio to do the actual artwork, and you'd given it to Japanese animation, which they did, but the animation was kind of, I don't like the full body motion cap type stuff for anime. It looks unnatural. It moves smoother, but it's unnatural looking. But if they did that, at least we would have some decent animation. And it was very stuttery. They had parts where she would just be standing there like this, and she wouldn't be moving a single muscle. And then she would move her lips, and then she would stand still. And seconds later, she would do this, and then go right back to it. And it was just like she was frozen in time because their animation was honestly that bad. It was not a high quality budget. At least it better not be. it was rough. But yeah, I would not rate this very high. The music wasn't very memorable. They changed a little bit of it, and I just didn't feel any nostalgia to the music, and I don't know. The characters weren't particularly charming. I mean, I liked the brothers. I liked Freyaloff. I thought the brothers had their own, especially the older brother had his own problems, but there was just plot contrivance after plot contrivance after plot contrivance. I would not give this a high rating at all. I mean, I feel like a 3 out of 10 would be very, very generous considering everything. Like, it's 2 hours and 10 minutes, and it felt way longer than that. It felt like 7 hours. And nothing was of value or of substance was in it. And if there was, I'd be totally fine. I love long movies. I love long TV shows, the series that go on and on and on, and they give you more information. You get to hear more about your characters that you like, and the character development's great. The story's great. I like those things. They didn't do that. They just made up a bunch of stuff that if it was limited on the just, oh, you're so amazing, so stunning, so brave, or I'm not going to marry any man because blah, 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 I'm celibate, or blah, 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 or whatever the case might be. If you had cut that down or cut it completely out and then just had a story in like a D&D world, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal because it's just a D&D world. You expect that kind of stuff anyway. But it doesn't fit in Tolkien's world. And when you have possibly 3-4 pages of the appendices that tell you about what happens, and you basically ignore all of that to make up your own story because you just like a character that you can't feel close to because she's not even named. She just daughter, potential proposal for marriage. That's it. And then you're like, let's build this whole story out of this as if that's actually what happened and stuff. Some of it maybe, most of it probably not. But ultimately, I'd give it a 2 out of 10 at best. 3 out of 10 if I was feeling really, really out of it, which I kind of am right now. But needless to say, I would not recommend it. I basically gave you, well, I didn't basically, I literally gave you the entire whole spiel and everything. And I'm trying to remember all the details that I possibly missed, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. But I'm hoping to do a review video with Crimson Law on his channel with him and Rolo. And we'll go over to probably a lot more detail than even this. I don't know how long it'll be or how short, but that will probably be the best time to go into the super detail and probably whip out the appendices and just read the appendices or something. But for now, that's all I can really think of. So if you did make it this far, thank you. Your support, whether it just be viewing the video or sharing the video or liking, comment, subscribing, anything, means a lot. It means the world. And I'd love it if more people could see videos like this if they're interested and they want to, maybe have somebody else who's just weird. Or maybe they're just interested in finding good quality content or avoiding bad content. Hopefully they'll find a home here. And if that's you, then welcome and thanks for sticking around as long as you did. It's not a short video and you're pretty awesome. So thanks everybody. But remember, my friends, walk in the light.